Hi, Christa.
There we go.
Oh, I'm very flushed now.
I'm so bad at Zoom. Let me tell you, it's terrifying.
Yeah, I was all ready. I had booked a special podcast recording room in my co-working space, and then it wasn't available when I wanted it. So never mind.
Listen, I hear you.
Let's lay plans.
Yes. Yes.
So what I kind of would really like us to do is to talk about what led you to wanting to write a book about the menopause.
Okay.
And I say the menopause, and I keep getting corrected by Grammarly to just say menopause.
Well, rather than the menopause.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Wait, how would that work in a sentence? So
So if I wrote
what was it like menopause for you, as opposed to what was it like the menopause?
I like to say what was the menopause like for you, not what was menopause like for you.
Yes, I prefer the former too. How interesting.
Yeah, I wondered if it's just something that's changed over time or...
No, it's like Kiev to Kiev.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that it's probably got way more semiotic meaning than we know.
Yes, exactly. I think so. Something for me to look into.
Yes.
I thoroughly enjoyed your book because it gave such good perspective, like a variety of perspectives, rather than I've read some books that read a bit like a HRT sales pitch.
Interesting. Yeah. I know what you mean. I mean, back to your earlier question, why did I write it? I mean, to be honest with you, the reason I wrote it is because I wrote a piece in a magazine supplement for the Times on reaching menopause, not the menopause. And it got such such a great response. I got approached by actually a publisher who wanted me to write a book on it, and I thought, okay, first book I've ever written, but actually it sort of felt like quite a natural thing to do, because basically that's what I do in a sense. I write about what's happening to me, and it was happening to me or had just recently happened to me. So it seemed a very sort of natural thing to do. And I'm quite upfront about most aspects of my life. And it seemed a kind of, apposite time.
And did you feel like at the time that you were unusual in being open about menopause?
Definitely. And I'll tell you, when I really noticed that was when I started interviewing friends. And they almost everyone I spoke to said, oh my God, I'm so glad you're doing that. I can't really talk about this with anyone.
Right.
Sometimes not even with each other. Yeah, I mean, we're talking, remember, this was written in 2016.
Yeah, I was wondering when you were doing the research for it, because of the publication date being 2017.
Yes, so it was 2006. It might have even been the end of 2015. So that's a good 7 years ago, and so much has happened in the last 7 years in terms of menopause.
Yeah.
And my target age group suddenly being taken notice of. But then, sorry, that's my dog in the background.
It's okay.
I'm so sorry.
We've all got things like that nowadays. Getting around it.
So yeah, I was, and these are women who are quite open about most aspects of their life. So it seemed odd not to be talking about it.
Did you find that before the topic turned to menopause that there was open dialogue about periods?
Yes, I do actually. That is something that we talked about. Yes, we did, and that was very much a sisterhoody thing. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. Yes, that was not a taboo subject amongst each other, but menopause was, because it was a kind of admission of us getting old, I guess.
Yes, perhaps. That makes sense. I often sort of remark that once women have had children, there's not much that's not on the card. Like, everything's out in the open. There's some sort of like element of of childbirth, but just like people are like, oh well, I've had to have my tits out in public, so I might as well talk about things like periods.
That's really true, and you're right. Nothing is off, nothing is taboo, but menopause was. It's like, it's got that sort of aura around it, like, the word spinster has got that aura around it. It's just such an unattractive, onomatopoeic word somehow.
Yes.
And
the only cultural well, maybe there's a couple, but the main cultural construct that I can think of for this time frame would be crone, and that has a lot of negative connotations with it.
Say that again. What has a lot of negative connotations?
The word crone for this time of life.
God, yes.
Negative.
Is that from chronology? Is it Greek? Is it chronos?
It could be time. As in time.
Yeah.
Yes. It's something used in paganism a lot. Huh. Okay.
I mean, there is nothing. Yeah, but that wow. Does anybody even use that word except in a really, 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 really negative way?
Exactly. And which seems like such a shame, because there's so many cultures, non-Western cultures, where that time of life is the prime for so many people, because it's when they're finally free of having children and looking after children, and a lot of housework, suddenly they don't have to do it anymore because their daughters are doing it, and so they look upon this time of their life as like freedom at last.
Well, it's funny. I have a Korean friend, a very successful, beautiful Korean friend who's 64. So she's 3 years older than me. And she was, I was complaining about, oh gosh, we're getting older and time seems to be going faster, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And she looked at me and she started shaking her head and saying, I don't understand. I don't get it. Because in our culture, this is when we're at our most productive. You're a mere stripling at the age of 61. This is when it all happens. And I sort of momentarily felt really hopeful about what she said, because I thought, this is just all we need. It literally is an attitude shift.
Yeah. And if you think about, most people will experience menopause somewhere between like 45 and 55, and people generally live to like 90 now. It really is middle age.
Yeah, the whole thing about goalposts changing, I think, it's so funny how language stays stuck in time, in aspic, where everything else around it is moving forward. And we haven't caught up with the fact that we're living longer yet in the way that we talk and relate to each other. So that's going to lag behind.
Yeah.
It's very hard, because I write a column about this, and I find even myself bridling slightly, at the very term menopause. I find myself, I'm sort of swept up in it myself, and as someone who's I'm supposed to champion women of my age and women older than me, and yet I find myself, when I see a woman being described as being in her mid-60s, I think, oh gosh, that's really old. And then I have to suddenly remember, wait a minute, I'm talking about
back. Yeah,
my contemporaries.
That's interesting. We were talking about this the other day, and I'm part of a gender studies group with the London Library, and we were talking about how difficult it is to be a feminist who believes that I shouldn't have to look beautiful, I shouldn't have to control my body hair amounts and how much makeup I have on, but at the same time feel less confidence if I don't shave my legs, and less confidence if I don't have my makeup on, and it's really hard.
So what do you think that's about? Part of me think, and it is tangential this, but bear with me, part of me thinks that this is actually all tied to us not being able to reproduce for our entire lives. And were we able to, things would be radically different. Or if men could get pregnant, things would be radically different and had the same, you know, their reproductive, or okay, maybe they couldn't get pregnant, but maybe if they stopped reproducing at the same age that we stopped reproducing.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think if they could get pregnant, then all of the gender roles would turn on their heads. But yes, I think what would happen if their sexual reproductive abilities stopped at roughly the same age? How would they deal with that?
I mean, I wonder if that would mean, gosh, would it mean we would just not keep living longer? Would it mean that sort of, you know, like technologically and culturally we'd all just stop, assuming that
yeah,
men, you know, kickstart change?
I mean, I think that partly the problem is biological. Is the fact that we do bear children that creates the schism in gender roles. But I think that I've lost my train of thought. I hate when this happens.
You know what I think is sort of interesting, and I clung to this, but I think I clung to it for a good reason. The fact that, you know, ancient civilizations and in, you know, the animal kingdom, you know, certain species, like for example whales, how the grandmother whale is really, really important to the pod because she's the one with the accumulated wisdom who can lead them to the salmon stocks.
Yeah.
And if so, that was very heartening. And as I said, I sort of cling on to it because, I mean, we shouldn't have to rationalize the fact that we're still alive as opposed to going and sitting in a corner and not, you know, being half dead, basically. But I feel that we sort of have to promote that there's a reason for our existence.
I think it's very interesting that most menopause books that I've read start with the question, why do we menopause? And my immediate reaction to that is why does there need to be a reason? And I feel like if men were doing it, we wouldn't be looking for a reason. We'd just be like, it is what it is. It's natural and we get on with it and it's fine. But we have to be like, why?
Maybe right. And maybe there's an algorithm so that we would know what society would be like if that were the case. Yeah, why do we have to? But the fact of the matter is, Natasha, we do.
We do, yeah.
And, you know, I feel it acutely with every passing year, actually every passing month. You know, how do you remain in the conversation, part of the conversation? And the older you get, to be perfectly brutal, the harder it gets. And, you know, the awful thing is that all of us inside, you'll find this when you get older, in your head, you stick at an age. In my head, I'm between 25 and 35, depending on how I feel.
Yeah.
So part of me thinks, well, of course I'm part of the conversation. And then I get so horribly shocked when I'm not, or at least I have to fight to be part of that conversation. And I don't know, I suppose bleating on and on about it, which I do, is the way to raise awareness. And you know, pendulum politics, you know, you have to be a little bit forceful in order for it
to go back the other way. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like a lot of the struggle and taboo, the unique taboo of menopause, is that it is interwoven with aging and our ungraceful attitudes towards aging in the Western culture that ends up causing a lot of emotional upset during this time as well.
Yeah, because don't you think that again, back to reproduction, but sexiness in vast tracts, no, in the entire Western world, is equated with youthfulness?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd be very interested in looking historically, was that ever not the case? Has there ever been a situation in Western society where we were more open to a wide age range as being perceived as beautiful. I have a feeling I can't think of an example.
I don't think so. I don't think so, no. And it may be one of those sad facts of life. But there are shades. I mean, when I look at, how French people approach the notion of women getting older, the idea of a woman in her 50s, maybe even 60s, still being sexually attractive is not so absurd. Certainly less absurd than it is from where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, for example, that series Call My Agent. I can't even think of their names on it now, but the idea of the older woman being sexy is not it's not so odd.
No. And it's funny because there has been books published where it's quite the interesting intrigue of the romance is that it's a younger guy with an older woman, and that's like interesting and racy because of its unusualness. But
I think that, what's it called, May September, I don't even know what it's called, that relationship, but I think that that's becoming a more acceptable thing. Again, was just talking to a friend of mine who is a little bit younger than me, I'd say mid to late 50s, who is a widower, and she now only dates men in their 30s, which, and makes no bones about it. She's American, interestingly.
And does she say that she has a particular reason?
She just finds them more attractive sexually.
Fair enough.
And has made that choice and doesn't, feel almost as though she doesn't need to explain herself. I mean, she's a rather unusual woman, but I rather like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather like that. Interestingly, she's had quite a lot of help cosmetically, so certainly doesn't look her age.
And I wonder if she doesn't feel her age as well. Well, you were saying that doesn't really happen anyhow.
Well, yes, but I wonder. Sometimes I wonder, if you change the outside, can you change the inside? Therapists will tell you no, but maybe you can a little bit.
I think you can. Like, I certainly so thoroughly associate wearing certain clothes with feeling certain ways that they make me feel that way. Definitely. And I don't see why cosmetic surgery would be any different. I would imagine that it does help, but I can see how it doesn't get rid of the fundamental perception that beauty is necessary for XYZ, and that beauty is defined in this strict manner.
I think you're right. And I make an example in the book. I'm thinking of Gloria Steinem, massively beautiful, obviously, like big time 60s feminist, massively beautiful and sexy in the 60s, and still a very beautiful woman. But I remember when I was writing this piece, seeing this picture of her it was pointed out to me, actually, picture of her in the New Yorker. And I looked at her and I thought, look, here's, one of the most famous feminists in the world, but she's bought into that whole you only look great if you look younger type of thing.
Yeah.
And even her, I suppose, is what I thought, even her. And yet at the same time, there's the other route. You can go the Germaine Greer route if you want. I think it's more tricky being a woman than a man in so many different ways.
Yes, quite. I think it all comes down to women being their primary role in our society and culture to be sex objects in one way or the other. And in this book that I've been reading called Slow Moon Climbs, it talks about other examples of different cultures where that isn't necessarily the case. But interestingly, they go through, in these other cultures, they go through the menopause and they feel freedom from conceiving every single time they have sex. So they actually have more sex as a result. And they say that it's like some of them say like it's the best sex life that they've experienced at that point.
I talked to a few women who looked at it like that, and hooray, no more periods. I got to say, I quite liked getting periods. I liked that way that it timed, it's sort of like it timed things, and also I could rationalize why I'd felt so ghastly. It gave me a reason. So there was always a kind of, you know, relief when I got it.
And did you have back periods, like the actual experience of bleeding?
Before I got pregnant, terrible. Absolutely terrible. And I inherited that from my mother, funnily enough. And I mean, I don't know if this is appropriate for this podcast, but I am sure that I had a form of endometriosis, and indeed ended up getting endometrial cancer. And I wonder if the two is related. But no, period. Note to everybody out there who still hasn't had children and has ghastly periods, often they get better after you have babies.
Yes, and unfortunately, the GP still to this day will tell people, just go and have a baby, it will make you feel so much better.
Oh, yeah, I remember that whole
I had patients who said that 10 years ago.
Oh, I know, that's so maddening. I remember hearing that from doctors. Excuse me.
And they were right. Damn it.
Yeah. sorry, but they are. Yes.
Yeah.
And then you know, right before you stop having periods, if you've always been incredibly irregular, suddenly you are like clockwork, almost to the hour, and the space between them becomes shorter. So, you know, you're having, it almost feels like you're constantly having a period, and it was like a Roman candle type of situation. And in a funny sort of way, I remember thinking, oh, am I going to be a medical anomaly where actually this means that I'm just going to have periods for the rest of my life and I'll be able to reproduce when I'm 60? But no, it was just a case of getting it all in before, you know, the very end. And it was quite sort of pathetic in a way, the end, because I remember being in Greece and like thinking, wait, you call this a period? And that that was my last.
That was the last one.
That was the last one. Yeah, and it was sad. I felt sad.
I feel sad for it.
Yeah, I did. You know, that it is a period of mourning. I mean, it's a much, you know, it's one of those rites of passage like adolescence, but such a bigger deal.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, when you get your period.
When you get your period, it's sort of exciting in a way. It's
like,
oh, this new part of me is starting. And
absolutely. And this is, you know, the other bookend, and it really feels so strongly like the end of a chapter. And of course, you know that you can only actually have menopause for one day, because it doesn't count until a year of not having
after. Yeah, and you just have to wait around for a year.
Yeah.
Was that going to be the last one?
And I remember thinking, oh, maybe it won't be the last one, but it was.
Oh. Yeah, I mean, imagine, because of that irregularity at the end and not really knowing when it's going to happen, and then not knowing for sure that it's definitely stopped for like a whole year after, it must mean that a lot of people's last periods come and go without much.
Yes.
Do you think everyone notices them?
No, I mean, maybe not. You know, I know a lot of women who just sailed through the menopause. I mean, they're barely even noticed.
Yeah.
And then I know other women who got so wistful. You know what? I knew of this woman, definitely in her 70s, who used to keep a packet of Junior Tampax on her bedside table, prominently displayed. It was so sweet and sad somehow, as though she was almost kidding people that she's still menstruating.
Leave them. Yeah. Oh, quite sweet. Yeah, I think was something that we really lack in Western societies, any kind of like ritual celebrations for these times of life. Like we have it for 16-year-olds birthdays, and you give it to your like kids when they're growing up and having their big birthdays, but we don't really do it for like times of life.
I think that is very tied to our fear of death, our cultural fear of death.
Yeah.
And I think not acknowledging the menopause is a big part of that. Cultures which acknowledge death and have rituals around death, look, a study hasn't been done on it, but I bet older women are more accepted in society than they are in Western societies, where you just don't talk about death. In fact, if you're really rich, you pretend you're not even going to die, like Elon Musk and all those guys.
And I feel like even though I still have one grandparent who's alive, she's like 98 or something, she has pretty severe Alzheimer's, so she doesn't remember, she wouldn't necessarily remember who I am if I saw her. But I feel a bit like these people who get Alzheimer's, and they maybe remember who you are or not, and they kind of just like, I feel like we just shove them away in a drawer that is a nursing home and just leave them, and we're like, they're kind of more or less dead to me now, and I'll put them there because it's easier, more practical. And like my mum will still has a good relationship with her mum, but she doesn't have one with me anymore. It ended a long time ago. So for me, when she does pass away, I'll be like, oh, okay, like that's exactly what I was expecting to happen.
Now you see, in certain cultures, like my father was because he's dead now, Indian, and in his culture and amongst his family, no older family member would ever go into a home. They're welcomed into the household. They pass judgment about, on their children's children and their children's children. They're almost put on thrones. And it's funny, my dad tried to be very, very English, but when he got older, I know that he expected us to take him in. And it was a huge cultural shock that we didn't.
Right.
And he deteriorated probably because of that, and might even be alive now probably had we done that, because that's what you do.
Oh, so he was expecting it so much that it was like almost too much of a shock.
He in the end, he reverted to type. He became more and more, having tried to be very English. The older he got, I don't know if he realized it, got more and more Indian, shall we say, culturally, Asian culturally. And by the time
you have to explain what that's like.
Well, by the time he reached his 70s, it was very clear that, this is what we do in our culture, and that's what my sister and I and my mother, should do. But it was very alien to us. And, so we didn't.
So did he live with you until his day?
No, he didn't. My parents divorced. But what we probably should have done, going off a bit off piece now, but is flew him out to India to be with his relatives back there, where he would have been embraced very warmly by that side of the family. No grandparent would ever die in a home in my father's side of the family.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. We talk about this with my children all the time, and they always kid about how they're going to shove me in a home very, very soon. But I certainly, they have no obligation, but I do sometimes think, I keep assuming that I'm going to be the way I am now for the next 20, 30 years, but I'm not.
It's very hard, isn't it? Because I think there's just so much taboo about death in our culture that it makes it actually very difficult to plan, to discuss things with the younger generation about what you'd like to happen or not like to happen, because often we're so just like la 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 la. please don't do that. And there, I don't know if you've ever come across a death doula.
Yeah, I have. Well, I haven't come across one, but I know that they exist, and I actually know someone who wants to become one.
Ah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's really fascinating. It seems to really improve the death experience for people.
Yeah. I think I would like to have one, actually, even though I don't want to think about it, but I, as a sort of like, you know, taking you from one room into the next room. I think that's a wonderful idea of sort of honoring that really, it's a precious time. It's a privilege to be with someone when they're dying.
Yeah. And I think too often the experience is handled so poorly that it's actually traumatizing for the people left behind.
Absolutely. And perhaps what we should be doing is, you know, engaging our children quite early on, instead of, you know, shoving grandparents in homes and you know, keeping it a mystery until they're old enough to know, because you're never old enough to know.
No,
but
you're never. That's so true.
You're also never too young to know either.
Yeah, you're always going to be children and parents, no matter your age.
Yes, and yeah, if I could have my babies over again, maybe I would have thought about that. But maybe for anybody listening out there who is about to have children, it might be something worth thinking about.
To engage in when they're young. Yes, my son's only 3, so I think we can. I do.
Didn't even know you had a baby. Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, I have a toddler at home, and sometimes I think I'm being really morbid, but I will give him warnings. I'll be like, if he's doing something really dangerous, I'll say, like, we have banisters down our staircase, for instance, that he can easily slip through. His whole body will fit through there and he will fall and die. And I say to him, like, don't do that, because if you do that, you'll really hurt yourself and potentially die. And then we won't be able to see each other anymore. And I try to like conceptualize what I mean by die. And I'm like, oh, I'm probably just being really dark for a 3-year-old.
No, I think it's a really, really good idea to explore that when children are curious and strangely fearless.
Yeah, he's got no fear.
No fear, as long as you give them a framework.
Yeah.
And you're in a great position to be able to give your child no fear about it when they get older. That's a really
yeah, I would hope
lucky
so.
you.
It's hard, but we'll try.
Yeah.
So I was kind of curious, when you approached writing your book, you've looked at it from all these different angles. What made you approach it that way?
Approach what?
Writing your book by interviewing lots of different people.
Oh, I see. Because that's as a journalist, I suppose you never trust your own opinion, really. You've got to go out and find, you know, you've got to go and find what other, you need to have your own thoughts confirmed by the outside world.
Yes. This is most of my journalists' experience with journalists, is them saying, I think maybe this, but could you write something?
Yeah, we always used to say when I worked at a fashion magazine, you know, if 3 people say it's cool, then okay, it's cool, but you have to have 3 people. So that seemed to me the only way of doing it. Even though it was in many ways a sort of memoir of menopause, it seemed the only way. And I really appreciate my contemporaries' view on life. And I do think that the more people you ask, the more you need. For every single person, it's different. I mean, I always say I'm only an expert on myself, and each of these women were experts on themselves.
Well, that's what I really like about it, because I find that that's actually my particular stance when it comes to history, is that I would like to see more personal takes on events, because I think realistically that all history is exactly that. And when we get it wrong, when we try to say, this is what happened in World War II for everyone, because it's not possible to give such big events from this general perspective and do it accurately.
I think that I love opinion and I love being opinionated, but I think that I also love other people's opinions. And I think what's really interesting to me is when lots of people's opinions jar against each other, and then you get some approximation of the truth.
Yes.
And so that's, I suppose, what I tried to do. You know, you get lots of different realities, and that therefore you can form your own median or your own average or your own most people.
That's exactly how I do it. Yeah, I think it's really important that we do more of a collection of different opinions within one place. And one of the big problems that we have in society now is that everyone chooses what they view on social media and what kind of news they take in, and it's usually from the same perspectives, and so it becomes echo chamber of opinion.
Well, yes, and I mean, you know, one can't help being a tiny bit echo chambery because, you know, I picked the people that I picked. But I agree with you about history. That social history interests me more than anything, and for me is more didactic in a good way than actually reading the history books. What was it like then for you? Gives, you know, you feel you can smell history that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes it so tangible and relatable when it's like that.
Because that's what humans want to do. Like, we all intrinsically want to belong. We want to be able to have that feeling in our brain, go, oh, I feel like that. Oh yeah, you know, we're cherry pickers.
Yeah, we are. Oh, absolutely. And we're looking for patterns all the time and categories and trying to put things in neat little boxes and
yeah. And I guess what's dangerous about, say, Instagram is you're not really doing that, are you? Because you are cherry picking, but it goes narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower.
Yeah, because the algorithms are like, if you like that, then you'll like this. And it's just, yeah, exactly what you say, which is my main problem with, this is totally off the mark now. This is my main problem with Spotify is when it comes to music, it tells you, oh, if you liked this jazz number, you'll like this other jazz number, and it just keeps telling me jazz. But I like so many genres.
Well, this is off piece, but I'm interested in this because that's the one time I like an algorithm is on Spotify.
Oh, interesting.
I do, because I actually, the type of music that I like, I don't really know very much about. So I'm constantly learning. I mean, yes, via Spotify's algorithm, but, you know, I'm intelligent. I can go this way and this way and this way and this way.
Yeah.
What really pisses me off is when my younger son in particular, he'll put some really goofy track on of something I really hate, and that will screw up my algorithm. You know, or I might be researching something and have to listen to a piece of music that I really hate, and then that screws everything up. But that's
so funny. It reminds me of, there's a book called Wanderer Society, Wanderers Society, something like this, and it's a book all about trying to find things random in your life again, like trying to have this attitude of discovery everywhere you go. And it talks about, like, when's the last time that you just walked somewhere just because? Like, when did you ever turn left even though you were planning on going straight forwards? Like,
so do you know there's that famous song by, I think it's by Chet Baker, called Let's Get Lost? And to me, that I think that's what you mean.
Yeah, that perfectly summarizes it. Yeah.
I'm the antithesis of that, but I need to take that path of most resistance.
This is the same with me. I found that having the opposite of that attitude in my life was making me experience anxiety in social environments, and so I had to really, like, learn how to be okay with doing things that weren't on the plan for the day. I did quite a lot of work on that before having a kid, because I thought
yeah, I mean, you know, there are the world is divided, right? But I think you can, you know, you can squeeze against the parameters. But I admire people who you know, sorry, my dog again, whatever happens, and hey, I'm fine if our plans change immediately, and hey, fine if it means we'll only have 50 seconds to get on the plane. I can't live like that. But there are, God, I find people who are like that attractive.
Yes. Yeah. Same.
So anyway.
Anyhow, I think it's safe to say that we're both in agreement that menopause is taboo because of it being interwoven with aging, and the aging process being so disregarded in Western society. But I was kind of curious whether you experienced menopause syndrome, like any negative physical experiences that you went through during that time.
Oh, sure. I mean, not as acutely as some other women I talked to, but, you know, I remember the two things that I can remember that first spring to mind. First of all, the sleeplessness.
Right.
For me, was my sleep is so crucial to my well-being and to everything about me, and it suddenly became impossible to sleep.
And was that because you were having hot flushes, or just?
No, I had no, just that, you know, just white nights for no reason, even if I was really tired. So that was weird and not nice. The hot flushes, I mean, yeah, they weren't as bad. I was more interested by them than bothered by them. It was like, oh, this heat is right. Wow, this is what's happening. This heat, it would come up like that, and for no reason. And I found it quite interesting. But I didn't get it as badly as a lot of other women. I didn't actually break out into sweats.
Yeah.
The other thing I noticed, and I'm quite conscious of my weight, is I found that all those tricks that used to work, you know, if you overeat, then you just, you know, really cut back the next day, they didn't work anymore. So, and especially around my middle, that was really noticeable. And then my back, which had always been sort of not bony but very lean, you know, you notice these funny little folds above and below your bra, which I'd never had before.
Right. Yeah.
And the other thing I really noticed was alcohol became a different thing, where you know, I'd always loved alcohol, but suddenly with menopause, I found it wasn't doing what it used to do, which meant I had to drink more. And it
so almost like your tolerance went up for it.
My tolerance went up for it. Yes, I get, what does it mean, tolerance lower or upper? What it meant was
you could drink more before feeling drunk.
Yes, but we never quite again did what it used to do, and it also made me sick and very hungover. But I kept plowing on.
Just gotta get through this.
Well, I eventually had to stop. And I think women, you know, around that age, there are a lot of, this is another topic, but it's sort of related, how, you know, you reach a certain age during perimenopause, and it's like the dance in the last chance saloon. I'm going to start taking drugs where I never did drugs before. I'm going to drink that fish. I'm going to have an affair. I'm going to do all those things before it's too late. And I talked to quite a few women who experienced that with quite negative effects.
Right.
You know, both physical and emotional, but you kind of cane it. Cane it right before you think you're never going to be interested in a party again, or having sex again, or whatever. And I mean, for me, I made the decision to stop because it was clearly not good for my body. And it's almost as though being perimenopausal taught me that. but it taught me the hard way. I'm just trying to think of other symptoms. Gosh, I can't remember any others. I'm sure there were. I mean, you know, women talk about how they felt mad, and you know, and that this perpetual sense of doom. I didn't get that. My sister certainly had it, and my mother certainly had it. But weirdly, they'd never talked to me about it before, even though we talk about everything with each other.
Oh, interesting.
And
what do you think the feeling of doom is about?
I suppose an exaggerated lack of hope.
I mean, everything else you describe, it sounds like people feel like death is imminent now.
Yes, but it's not just that. It's about that something bad is going to happen.
Interesting, right?
Not necessarily death. I'm sure it's tied to that, but just, I don't know, someone I love is going to get run over. Or this is what I did.
Yeah.
What I heard anecdotally from friends. I didn't get that. I have that anyway. So, but that sense, and also that the sense of despair, and you know, actually some really horrible things that women experience, which is why doctors and society being very accepting of HRT, and you know, nice guidelines, rules changing, everything is a good thing.
Yeah,
it is a good thing. But I think also, as we were talking about before, not everyone does need to take it. We shouldn't be bullied into taking it.
Yeah, I need to research more about what it is they've licensed for over-the-counter use in the chemist, because I've heard on the grapevine it's not actually what you would have been given by a GP when it comes to HRT.
I think it's a lower dose, isn't it?
A little bit different. Just the dosage is different.
And it's also not the thing about, they talk about bioidentical, and that's such a term anyway, is what it means is it's compounded to suit. So you might have a little bit more estrogen, a little bit less progesterone, a tiny bit more testosterone, depending on your biochemical makeup. That's really, I think, what is meant by bioidentical.
And the HRT that you took, was that bioidentical? Did you go down that route?
Yes, I did. You know, I went privately, and yes, I had, although it turns out, I mean, bioidentical, I was taking pretty much what everybody else was taking, which is a pump of the estradiol, and then progesterone tablets, which you take for a certain amount of days a month.
And the pump is a cream that's applied, is that correct?
It's a gel.
An
odorless gel. When I say odorless, it is a bit weird. Not weird,
odorless, but kind of stinky.
An acute sense of smell.
Yeah.
That's another thing, by the way, I noticed just before I got the menopause, was my sense of smell went through the roof. I mean, I just smelled everything, and there were certain things that may be me, though. I have that's
fascinating
of smell anyway.
I love all these little kind of things, but it sounds like you had a fairly not problematic menopause.
Unless no, went on for ages. Talking to other women, talking to my mother and my sister, no, I didn't. I was quite lucky. Having said that, I think I benefited hugely from.
I was going to say, but I think you wrote that you was very happy taking it.
No, I totally did. I mean, little things like, and a friend pointed this out to me. For example, the older you get, the more your nails become quite ridgy. They get ridges on them.
Yeah.
Estrogen makes them smooth again. Your hair feels nice. You know, my hair, and your skin feels nice, and you can sort of feel it oiling your bones. And I have quite lacy bones anyway, and it's, you know, there is some protection for your heart. And I remember I took 2 pumps to begin with, and that was too much. I remember feeling quite sort of bloated and premenstrual. But then we got down to 1, and we titrated it, and it was great. And I regret, I mean, no, wrong word. I to a degree, I think I miss it. Do I? I think so. Yeah, I think I do.
So did you get to a point where you were forced to stop because of medical problems, or did you decide to stop before that?
Yes, I stopped because I was diagnosed with endometrial estrogen positive cancer.
And you'd had a cancer before that, was that right?
It was also estrogen positive. So a lot of people, when I started taking HRT, said, how can you be doing that when your cancer was estrogen positive? But I had talked to many, many doctors about it and felt safe enough to be taking the dose that I was taking.
Yes, I would think it would be very much dose related, but yeah.
And actually, no less than 3 doctors told me, if you're worried about estrogen levels in your body, then stop drinking. Because the link between women over drinking and getting estrogen positive cancer is quite a strong one. So actually, that was probably the smartest thing I ever did in terms of my estrogen intake. However, so I was also prescribed progesterone. You need to take progesterone if you're taking estrogen, so there isn't a big estrogen buildup.
Dominance, yeah, that makes sense.
Unless you don't have a uterus. I did have a uterus. So I was diagnosed with that, had a hysterectomy and had radiotherapy. And in retrospect, I think, given my history with estrogen and given the fact that I did want to go on HRT, I actually wish I'd had an elective hysterectomy when I first started taking HRT. That would have been the smart thing to do. And actually, I think they should provide elective hysterectomies on the NHS so that women who really need HRT but have a slight problem with estrogen should be able to, should be able to do both.
And do you think, looking at it, this is a crazy question, but looking at your past self, if you'd been told, we recommend that you have an elective hysterectomy, do you think at that point in time you would have been like, yeah, that sounds like a good precaution to take?
I was asked that, and I remember thinking, that's crazy. Why on earth would I want to do that? But if I had my time again, yeah. I mean, God.
The alternative was not so fun.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had no idea. It didn't occur to me that it never does. You never think anything's going to happen to you. But yes, I would have. Yes, I absolutely would have had one.
And surgery always feels like a really big step in preventing something.
Yeah, it felt like something like crazy rich American ladies did.
Like Angelina Jolie having both her breasts taken away.
Exactly. Which, by the way, 10 years later or whatever it is, does not seem like a crazy thing to do at all.
No.
And
that's partly because our surgery has got so much better in a relatively short space of time, that surgeries themselves are not the dangerous thing that they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago.
Yeah, and I think we need to be cautious when it comes to our hormones. In my case, estrogen. One, it's something I didn't perhaps give enough thought to. And yes, in answer to your question, I would definitely have gone ahead and had the hysterectomy, which, by the way, was completely painless procedure. And yeah,
amazing. Does it affect anything about how you very personal, you can edit this out if you like, did it affect your bowels or bladder in any way having it removed?
Well, at first it does. For the first 2 or 3 weeks you feel very strange around there because everything has to sort of shift,
resettle. Yeah.
No, that happened with radiotherapy big time though. That was a real, anyone having radiotherapy on that area, that's quite a big deal. At least it was for me. But the hysterectomy, no, that all sorted itself out really easily, actually. No, it was
surgery is fascinating.
Well, I mean, perhaps it was my surgeon, but I've got these 2 tiny little things because they take it out here.
Is it keyhole then? Must be.
Yes, it is.
Amazing.
And you can literally, like the team, nobody would ever notice unless I pointed them out. So neat, and you know, straight after the operation, you can hardly see them. So yeah.
Oh, it's incredible what they can do.
Yeah,
definitely. So, do you think that people should be going to their chemist with open arms for HRT on their masses, or have you been convinced now that maybe there should be more caution?
You know, that news came out while I was in the middle of radiotherapy, and I remember thinking perhaps people should talk to their doctors first if there's any suggestion of a problem with too much estrogen. And I think HRT is I think it literally has saved women's lives, and it was a great experience for me.
Yeah.
I mean, I know women who really, quite literally, it saved their lives. Women who felt absolutely, you know,
suicidal without it.
Suicidal, yeah. Or like they were going mad, or a combination of both. But I think that if you are sort of doing it just because everybody else is doing it, it might be worth thinking, hang on, it's really worth having a chat with a sympathetic doctor about it. And they do exist.
They do exist, yes.
Really,
it's not all just salespeople.
they do exist. It's funny because my oncologist, my first oncologist after I got breast cancer, I remember telling her that I was going on HRT. This was how long afterwards, about 4 or 5 years after I gotten grade 1 breast cancer. And she went, why? And I remember thinking, God, you're old fashioned.
How funny. How ageist of you, Christa.
But she actually turned out to be right. In my case. And by the way, there are a lot of, you know, there are women in my case who've had endometrial cancer who take hormones, take HRT afterwards. In fact, take progesterone in order to make sure there's not too much estrogen in their body.
Yes, because they work in balance with each other, and they're sort of relative to one another.
And interestingly, without anything in my body now, I feel okay. Yeah, I do. I mean, a bit.
Do you think that that's because you got more healthy? Do you think it's because there's less stress in your life? Like, what do you think?
I don't know. I struggle sometimes whether something's psychosomatic or real. You know, what comes first, the thought or the feeling? So I mean, I'm constantly aware of my body and how I feel. I wake up every morning thinking, how am I feeling emotionally and physically? And I have to say, no, I feel okay. I can't complain. I am not begging for HRT by any stretch. But I imagine that for some women, I mean, but remember, it has been so it's like 7 years since I became menopausal. So it could be that those symptoms would have died out anyway.
Yes, we'll never know.
We'll never know.
I have one last question. Do you think that if we had a more positive attitude in our culture to aging, that women would actually physically suffer less through menopause?
Physically?
Yeah.
You mean in terms of what we were talking about before, hot flushes?
Yeah, do you think there would be less hot flushes in the world?
I think if one's shortcomings are more accepted, then they have become less hard to bear. That's what I think. All the bad things that happen to us, if people are sympathetic and understanding and don't use those things against us, then they become easier. That's what I think.
Yeah.
So in answer to your question, yes. Yes.
Lovely. Well, thank you.
My pleasure.